Good morning, Mr. President. Per National Security Council directive, this classified intelligence assessment reviews United States strategic posture in East Asia from August 1945 to the present year of 1965. As we evaluate expanding military commitments in Vietnam, this memorandum examines 2 decades of regional strategy, distinguishing key policy failures from our primary successes. To evaluate the sphere of operations, we define success as the long-term containment of communist expansion alongside the creation of stable, Western-aligned economic state capacity. Conversely, failure constitutes the loss of sovereign territory to foreign influence or an inability to maintain strategic stability. Under this framework, our central conclusion is, while containment suffered a severe mainland setback with the fall of China to Soviet alignment, American policy successfully established an impenetrable island chain network security system centered on a democratic, heavily industrialized Japan and reinforced by bilateral alliance with South Korea and Taiwan. Following Japan's 1945 surrender, the United States assumed exclusive control over the nation's reconstruction, successfully preventing Soviet participation in the occupation regime. President Truman appointed General Douglas MacArthur as Supreme Commander for the Allied powers. Operating with near absolute exclusive authority and answering directly to Washington, MacArthur held the power necessary to enforce American strategic interests across the islands. Our strategy pursued 2 core objectives: fully excluding Soviet influence from the Japanese archipelago and converting a former adversary into a prosperous capitalist anchor, under the principle that economic stability is the prerequisite for enduring American alignment. General MacArthur executed these reforms with remarkable precision across 3 primary pillars. Demilitarization and security. Utilizing the United States military as an outer defense shield, we dismantled Japan's imperial war machine and enshrined strict pacifism under Article 9 of the 1947 Constitution. This defense guarantee allowed Tokyo to redirect national revenues away from defense spending and entirely toward industrial investment, while neutralizing any resurgence of Japanese imperial ambitions. Educational and social reform. MacArthur overhauled the state education system, dismantling wartime nationalist indoctrination and replacing it with a democratic, student-centered curriculum designed to foster civic participation and Western alignment. Industrial restructuring. To eliminate the financial enablers of Japan's wartime aggression, MacArthur ordered the dissolution of the Zaibatsu, the massive family-controlled industrial monopolies that dominated the pre-war economy, paving the way for competitive market structures. However, the true catalyst for Japan's rapid economic resurrection occurred in June 1950 with the outbreak of the Korean War. As the United States and United Nations forces deployed to the peninsula, Japan became the primary staging ground and logistical engine for the war effort. Between 1950 and 1953, Washington poured billions of dollars directly into the Japanese economy through military procurement, contracts for trucks, textiles, munitions, and shipping repair. This emergency war demand revitalized Japanese heavy industry, eliminated its trade deficits, and sparked the Japanese economic miracle, firmly locking Tokyo into the Western sphere just as conflict erupted on the Korean Peninsula. Turning now to the Korean Peninsula, a territory divided along the 38th parallel, 1945, between Kim Il-sung's Soviet-backed regime in the north and Syngman Rhee's anti-communist dictatorship in the south. Our initial approach in Korea suffered from a severe strategic miscalculation. In January 1950, Secretary Acheson's defensive perimeter speech explicitly excluded Korea from America's vital defense sphere. Moscow and Pyongyang interpreted this public signal as a green light to invade. On June 25, 1950, North Korea invaded the South, exposing the danger of ambiguous deterrence and forcing a costly military intervention. Despite this initial policy breakdown, our operational response demonstrated key strategic successes. President Truman capitalized on a Soviet boycott of the UN Security Council to secure a UN mandate. This transformed a unilateral American intervention into a legitimate international coalition, a diplomatic triumph that isolated the communist bloc. General MacArthur's amphibious assault at Incheon shattered North Korean momentum, proving that rapid force projection could restore a collapsed front. When Chinese intervention pushed forces back, MacArthur publicly demanded atomic strikes and an invasion of mainland China. In April 1951, fearing that an invasion of China would result in devastating consequences, Truman dismissed MacArthur from his position as general, proving a major strategic success. It firmly asserted civilian control over the military and prevented an unmanageable Third World War with the Soviet Union. Overall, Korea must be evaluated as a mixed policy result. The attempt to force total unification by pushing to the Yalu River was a clear intelligence and military overreach that triggered Chinese intervention. However, forcing a 1953 armistice ultimately fulfilled our core containment objective. We successfully preserved South Korea's sovereignty, prevented the fall of the Korean peninsula into the Soviet orbit, and established a permanent military presence that secures the Western approach to Japan through military bases in South Korea. Turning to the mainland, our policy towards China represents our single largest strategic failure in the post-war era. Following the 1945 Japanese surrender, President Roosevelt's vision relied on Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government to serve as the democratic anchor of East Asia. However, Washington severely underestimated the systemic corruption, military ineptitude, and economic collapse within the Nationalist Party. While Chiang operated as an authoritarian warlord reliant on a personal army, Mao Zedong's Chinese Communist Party mobilized 90% of China's population by framing its revolution around agrarian land reform for the peasants. Our diplomatic and economic interventions failed to prevent communism in China. General George Marshall attempted to broker a coalition in government between the nationalists and the CCP. The mission was an ideological failure. Neither side had any intention of power sharing, and the resulting U.S. arms embargo temporarily weakened the nationalist military readiness. Massive monetary aid to Chiang failed to stabilize the regime. Instead of funding state capacity, the nationalists printed currency recklessly, bankrupting the urban middle class and destroying popular support for the nationalist government. Despite billions in American aid, Chiang's forces collapsed, retreating to Taiwan. Mao proclaimed the People's Republic of China, and Washington enforced an economic embargo, forcing Beijing directly into a treaty of mutual assistance with Stalin's Soviet Union. Overall, China was an unmitigated policy failure. We backed a corrupt regime incapable of governing, losing the mainland and over 500 million citizens to the communist sphere. While the mainland was lost, our policy succeeded in preserving Taiwan as the central link of our Pacific defense perimeter. Following the nationalist retreat in Taipei in 1949, Mao Zedong attempted to test American resolve by shelling the offshore islands of Quemoy and Matsu during the Taiwan Strait crisis of 1954 and 1958. President Eisenhower responded decisively, deploying the United States Seventh Fleet to the Formosa Strait and signing the 1954 Sino-American Mutual Defense Treaty. By drawing an unambiguous naval line in the strait, we successfully neutralized Beijing's amphibious ambitions, preserved the survival of the Republic of China on Taiwan, and secured the central link of our Pacific island chain. Mr. President, as we conclude this National Security Council memorandum, let us synthesize the strategic arc of East Asia from 1945 to this present year of 1965. Over the past 2 decades, United States foreign policy navigated a total transformation of East Asia. We managed the transition of Japan from a defeated fascist enemy into a democratic industrial powerhouse, and the primary economic anchor of our Pacific strategy. On the mainland, we confronted the catastrophic collapse of the nationalist government, losing China to Soviet-aligned communism. In Korea, we drew a hard line against communist aggression, fighting a brutal limited war that preserved South Korean sovereignty and reasserted civilian control over our military doctrine. And across the Formosa Strait, our firm naval presence preserved the security of Taiwan as a vital link in our defensive chain. When applying our analytical criteria, where success is defined as long-term containment coupled with stable, Western-aligned economic state capacity, and failure as the loss of territory or strategic stability, the lessons of this theater become crystal clear. First, American intervention fails when we attempt to prop up corrupt, unviable proxy regimes, lacking internal legitimacy. In mainland China, no amount of American capital or weaponry could compensate for a government that had lost the faith of over 90% of its people. Second, American intervention succeeds when we pair military protection with rapid economic development and clear, unambiguous security guarantees. By implementing the San Francisco system, our hub and spoke network of bilateral defense pacts with Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines, we turn the Pacific Rim into an impenetrable capitalist barrier. As your administration evaluates expanding our military commitment in Vietnam, these 20 years in East Asia offer an urgent warning and a proven blueprint. Military force alone cannot secure a nation if local political and economic institutions are hollowed out. But where we establish unambiguous defense lines and foster genuine economic capacity, American policy achieves enduring victory. Overall, the Pacific Rim is secure, Mr. President. The economic and industrial core of East Asia, other than China and North Korea, remains firmly in the free world. This concludes our classified assessment. The National Security Council stands ready for your command.